Hello and welcome. I am Hiral Mandal. Today I am going to discuss about Model Tenancy Act 2021. Let's get started. If you have heard about the news, recently you see the Union government has cleared the Model Tenancy Act 2021. The act proposes the rent and duration of tenancy to be fixed by mutual consent between the tenant and the owner through a written agreement. The act has been reportedly aimed to protect the interest of both tenants as well as the landlords. The act overhauls the legal framework of rental housing in the country and enables the institutionalization and formalization of rental housing in the country. The act is expected to give a flip to the private participation in rental housing and thereby addressing the huge housing shortage, especially in the urban areas of the country. This act is considered as one of the milestones in the rental housing in the country, and this is expected to bring a widespread change in the rental housing in the country. We'll try to understand the Model Tenancy Act, what are the key provisions of the Model Tenancy Act, what are the positives of it, and we'll try to understand the shortcomings of the act. But before going further, let me first brief you about the status of rental housing in India. If you look at the rental housing in India, the constitutional provision with respect to the rental housing in India is that it is regulated by states as it falls under the state subject of the constitution. Land improvement and control of rent falls under the state list of the constitution. So therefore, it is the responsibility of the state to implement the provisions with respect to the rental housing. However, the central laws are providing in order to give a guidance to the state. Now, if you look at the post-independence, the rental housing is regulated through the rent control laws. These laws specified a number of issues with respect to the rental housing. They specified the rental amount, they have put condition for eviction of the tenant, they prevent the landlord from charging exorbitant rents and ensure that the people found safe and stable housing. So it is to be noted here that these rent control laws are basically supporting the tenants. So they were favoring the tenants instead of landlords. So as a result of this, the landlords were not investing in the premises, and this has been noted by the Draft Rental Housing Policy 2015. If you see the draft paper, this draft paper has noted that due to these rent control laws, the rental housing in India is not yielding much profit to the landlords. They disincentivize the landlords from investing in the rental properties, and these are skewed in favor of tenants, making it difficult to evict them. And as a result, because of the conflict between the tenants and the landlords, more number of litigations you can see in the court. As a result, there is a loss of trust and credibility of the regulatory system in the eye of landlords. So these problems were rightly mentioned under the draft rental housing policy. With respect to the reform, if you see in the tenancy laws, the first reform that was introduced under the Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission in 2015. In fact, JNNURM suggested to repealing of the rent control laws as a mandatory reform if the state has to find or state has to seek money under the JNNURM. It is stated that the state could formulate laws regulating rental housing on the Model Rent Legislation 1992. Further, if you look at the status of rental housing in the country, the rental housing is predominantly a urban phenomena. If you see the rural India, in rural India, most of the people have their own houses, they reside in their own houses. So there is no demand for rental housing in the rural India. However, in urban area, due to increased migration towards the urban areas, there is a huge demand for rental housing in the urban part of the country. If you look at the global phenomena, there is a trend in the global rental housing. The demand for rental housing in urban area is proportionate to the growth in the population living in urban areas. Okay, so this is the situation if you see globally. However, if you look at the country and look at this fact in India, that acts in a different way. Here you see in 1951, if you compare the situation from 1951 to 2011, you see the urban population grew by 6 times. However, if you see the urban demand for urban rental accommodation, that has decreased from 58% in 1961 to 27% in 2011. So this is a different phenomena that you see in terms of rental housing in the country. One important feature that you need to understand, that urban areas also face a significant housing shortage. As of 2012, the urban housing shortage was estimated to be at 1.9 crore units. And this has been highlighted by the draft National Urban Rental Housing Policy. This policy has noted that the housing shortage in urban areas will not be solved by home ownership. Rather, there is a need for promoting rental housing in the country. On this background, the Model Tenancy Act 2021 has been recently approved by the Union Cabinet for adoption by states and union territories. Now, this Model Tenancy Act has made several provisions. We'll try to look at these provisions. If you look at the specific provisions that the Model Tenancy Act 2021 has made, it has made several provisions with respect to the tenancy agreement, security deposits, dispute adjudication mechanism. It has also mentioned provision with respect to the evacuation of the premises by tenants. It has also made provision with respect to the subletting, tenancy period, and procedure and timeline for adjudication. We'll be looking at all these provisions one by one. So the first thing about the tenancy agreement. The tenancy agreement, the Model Act states that the tenancy agreement must be signed between the landlord and tenant, and for this there must be a written agreement between the landlords and tenants, and they must specify whatever the terms and conditions they are agreed upon. Now, this tenancy agreement is applicable to all premises used for residential, commercial, and educational purposes. So it is not restricted to the residential purposes only, but also other purposes. For other purposes, tenancy agreement must be signed in the written format. The second provision is with respect to the security deposit. Now, with respect to the security deposit, it has mentioned separate provisions for residential premises and non-residential premises. For residential premises, the security deposit may not exceed 2 months' rent, whereas in case of non-residential premises, the security deposit may not exceed the 6 months' rent. So this is about the security deposit. Another important provision is with respect to the tenancy period. The tenant may request the landlords for renewal or extension of the tenancy period, and for that the tenant will be liable to pay enhanced rent. So here the tenancy period, once the agreement is done, and for that time period the agreement has been done, if the tenant stay for a long period of time, they will have to pay the enhanced rent that is mentioned under this agreement. Now, another provisions of this act is about the eviction. Now, it is to be noted that eviction under the previous Tenancy Act was difficult, and it was difficult for the landlords to evict the tenants from their premises. Now, this act talks about that there is a provision that the tenants can be evicted from the premises of landlord. For that, the landlord must apply to the rent authority seeking such eviction. The Act also mentions the ground for eviction. For example, if the tenant is refused to pay the agreed rent, in that case, the eviction can be done. If they misuse the premises and bring structural changes in the premises, that is also the ground for the eviction of the tenant. Apart from that, the provision is also about the subletting. Under the Model Act, the subtenancy is prohibited unless allowed through a supplementary agreement. The Act mentions provisions with respect to dispute adjudication mechanism. This is one of the important mechanism, and that will address the problem of grievances of the landlord and tenants. The Act proposes to establish a three-tier quasi-judicial mechanism for adjudication of disputes between landlords and tenants. The rent authorities and rent courts will be appointed by the district collector with the approval of the state government. And apart from that, the rent tribunal can also be established by the state in each district, and that has to be done after consulting with the jurisdictional high court. Now, it is important here to understand that no civil court will have a jurisdiction over matters pertaining to the provisions of under the Model Act. Now, this is important provision with respect to the Model Tenancy Act. Apart from that, that act also mentions about the procedures and timeline for adjudication. It mentions the timelines about the adjudication, which varies from 30 days to 90 days. It specifies the process for examination of cases and judicial conduct by rent courts and rent tribunals. After understanding the key provisions, let me share the key benefits that the Act will provide. The Act is expected to provide many benefits. It will, if you see the various provisions, it seeks to balance interest and rights of the landlord and tenants. Earlier reforms were basically targeted towards bringing more provisions for the tenants. They were supporting to the tenants, but now this act giving enough right to the landlord also. So therefore, it aims to strike a balance between the landlord and tenants. Another important benefit that you see under the act, that it creates adequate and affordable rental housing stocks in urban part of the country. It will enable formalization of rental housing market. This is a reform which aims to institutionalize and regularize the rental housing in urban part of the country as well as rural part of the country. So therefore, formalization of the rental housing can be speeded up. And this is important due to the fact that it will give flip not only to the housing sector, but also it will give flip to the economy as a whole. So regularization of the rental housing is considered as one of the important step in improving the housing sector in the country. It will also encourage private participation in the sector since it has been regularized, since the landlords are given enough power and their interests are being protected. So therefore, you can see the private participation in the rental housing sector. It will also unlock the vacant premises. So if there are various rental premises, those rental premises can be economized now. Now these the economic benefits or economic potential can be accrued with the help of this act. So overall, if you look at this act is going to benefit a lot to the economy. It is going to provide housing to the needy people, and at the same time it will lead to the formalization of rental housing in the country. Despite the fact that the act provides a lot of benefits, however, there are some shortcomings of the act. We'll discuss all the shortcomings one by one. The first shortcoming is about the lack of comprehensive rental housing policy. A comprehensive rental policy requires addressing the issue of affordability of housing, promoting shelter facilities, incentivizing the market-driven rental housing. However, the Model Tenancy Act does not address these issues. A comprehensive rental housing policy requires all these issues to be addressed. The second criticism made of this act is about the affordability. Now, if you look at the urban housing shortage, 96% of our urban housing shortage pertains to economically weaker section and lower income group categories. However, the act does not address the issue of affordability of housing, especially for these sections of the society. Now this needs to be addressed. Apart from that, there is another issue of informal renting housing market. In India, rental housing is dominated by informal sector, and they remain in informal sector due to the provisions that their arrangements are unrecorded. Now the Model Tenancy Act needs to address these unrecorded arrangements. For this, it needs to mention steps such as use of IT enabled platforms to decrease transaction cost, simplification of registration process in a time bound manner, and facilitation of online registration of properties. Apart from that, there is the issue of vacant housing stocks. In India, if you see the 2011 census, according to that census, 1.1 crore houses are vacant in urban areas, and the reasons are identified as low rental yield. It means that the rent is not attractive to the landlords, it is not economically rewarded. There is a fear among the landlords about the repossession of their premises, and there is a lack of incentives to the landlords to develop the premises. So therefore, there is a lot of houses that remains vacant in the urban areas. So the Model Tenancy Act, if looking to prosper the rental housing in the country, they need to address that issue. Apart from that, the Model Act specifies minute details about the rental agreement. Some of the minute details you can see in the form of example as that it is the act mentions that the landlord must carry out structural repairs and whitewashing of walls and doors. Tenant must be responsible for drain cleaning and so on. So these minute details will complicate the process and it will attract a lot of litigation in the court. Another important criticism you see about the mandating Aadhaar to register agreements. This provision may violate Puttaswamy judgment given by Supreme Court. In its judgment, the Supreme Court held that the requiring Aadhaar card or number may only be mandatory for expenditure on a subsidy, benefit, or service incurred from the Consolidated Fund of India. So, the provisions with respect to mandating Aadhaar to register agreement may violate the Supreme Court judgment. So these are the basic shortcomings of the Act. Now, if the rental housing has to be successful in the country, it needs to address all the shortcomings of the Act. I hope you have understood all the provisions of the Model Tenant Act. First, we discussed about the overview of the Model Tenant Act. Secondly, we discussed about the development of Model Tenant Act 2021. Then we discussed about the benefits and key provisions of the Act. And also, at the same time, we discussed about the shortcomings of the Act. Now, in this way, you can organize your thought process, and whenever the question is asked in UPSC mains examination, you can organize your answer in this way. Thank you.